Well, it was a very chaotic situation. Some of the boys reported, I hadn't seen it myself, some of the troops below deck were looking through the side windows on the ship, what do you call it, the portholes. And a couple of them reported, whether it's true or not, I didn't see it, that curiosity, a lot of the boys were sticking their neck out and watching the planes come in and attack. And when it was finally hit, there were a couple of them, their heads really were torn off. The convoy was being followed by 2 German planes or 3 German planes that came out of southern France. And they were evidently reporting and going back to their headquarters. And sure enough, about 4:15 in the afternoon, all hell broke loose. There must have been 10 or 15 German planes. There were American planes that came up there. Each of the 23 ships, the guns were going a mile a minute, and it was a very raucous situation. We were told at the time to go below deck. I'm sorry. Each of us followed the instructions. We're going below deck, and nobody knew what happened when all of a sudden there was this tremendous, tremendous thud, and sure enough, we knew the ship had been hit. How badly, we didn't know. It evidently was hit towards the front of the ship. And suddenly, there were boys battered, bleeding. It was the engineer outfit where there were about 600 men from 2 engineering outfits. And for those who could still walk, there was a struggle to get up on deck. It was rather chaotic, but I think in view of the situation, each one did respect the other. And I know we finally got up on deck. At that point, the ship was listing badly. The low side was so low you can almost touch the water with your hand. And the high side was so high it was about 3 stories above the water. Somewhere along the line, I remember being told, if anything happens, don't go off the low side, because the tide will bring you back into the ship and you won't be able to get away. If you go with the high side, chances are the tide will be with you and you will be able to get some distance from the ship. So after a while, there was no real instruction because the communication system was out. Well, there was some officer, a couple of officers start yelling, "Abandon ship, abandon ship." At that point, there were, to the best of my knowledge, there were about 20 some odd lifeboats on the side of the ship. And not one of them ever got into the water. They didn't get into the water for several reasons. Number one, the steel girders that were holding them in place were all rusted, and they had to be broken loose to get a ship into the water. In addition to which, there was an Indian crew who was in charge of getting lifeboats into the water, or some of these rubber rafts into the water, but most of the Indian crewmen were the first to go overboard. The American GIs didn't know very much about anything, and so you had to forget about that. At that point, I took my shoes off, put them on the deck, took my jacket off, and I started down the high side. There were rope ladders all along the side of the ship. And when I got to the bottom, it was a drop of about 20 or 30 feet yet. But I let go, and for the first time, I hit the water, and I suddenly realized, what the hell am I doing here? The going off the high side was good advice because each stroke took me another 4, 5, 6 feet away from the ship. However, there were pools of oil that were burning as a result of the bomb. So you had to, if nothing else, try to part the water, get 2 of them to clear water. As a result of this little fiasco, I received burns on both my arms. And as a result, later on, I did get the Purple Heart. Okay, continuing, the water was cold, the night was dark, you couldn't see anything, but in the distance there were 1 or 2 ships that were moving slowly, and they were there to pick up survivors. The convoy itself took off, otherwise they'd be a sitting duck. After about, I don't know, an hour or 2, and this time, as I say, we're beginning to feel cold, we feel numb, and the thought of being able to last for any great time seemed to be a figment of our imagination. When the ship was hit, there were GIs on the deck that were taking and throwing anything that moved into the water, whether it be an empty barrel, a cover for the decks there, and somewhere along the line, there was one of these hatch covers that passed by, and I grabbed on. And along with me, there were about 6 or 7 boys grabbed on also. I think possibly that was one of the main reasons I was able to survive, because you couldn't swim for any length of time in that water. Now, I explained to you that we were given life belts, not a covering, and you were supposed to wear it, let the belt slip under your arm so it would carry you along. A lot of the boys released the capsule that expanded the safety guard, and it remained on their waist. And what happened, because it was a highly pressurized tube, it was taking anybody who was wearing it on their waist and turning them over so that their head would hit the water. And that, of course, was the fallacy of wearing it there. As a result, while in the water, there were any number of these boys that floated by. They had already drowned. How long we would be able to continue, nobody knew. The one thing we did know is that we were cold, we couldn't swim, you better hang on for dear life. And sure enough, after what seemed like a lifetime, we saw a light coming in our direction. It was the American minesweeper, the Pioneer. And they were circling the area slowly, picking up survivors. And in doing so, being pitch black, they probably had a lot of boys caught in their mechanism, and they were killed as a result of being too close to the ship while it was trying to pick up survivors. It was, as near as I can determine, about 7 or 8 hours being in the water before I was close enough to the Pioneer to say, maybe I can get up on deck. Most of us had their strength sapped, and even though they got to the side of the ship, They didn't have the strength to get up on deck. There were 3 or 4 sailors there, and they deserve a world of credit. They were in and out of the water, helping the survivors either get up on deck, putting a rope around them so they don't sink, do anything to help them survive. And I know I managed to get up on my own strength, and when I got up on deck, I just collapsed. Judging from the time the attack took place, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Pioneer, after picking up 600 men, set sail for North Africa. I estimated that I must have been in the water about 7 or 8 hours. Most of us were laying on deck in little cubby holes and what have you. They tried to give us some coffee or something to warm us up, and we couldn't take anything. We had so much salt water, we just kept throwing up. But the ship took off in North Africa about 1 o'clock. And we arrived the following morning. We arrived at a British camp. Most of us didn't have clothes or full uniforms. We had no shoes. We were walking off the ship barefooted or in just stocking feet. And the British furnished us with British uniforms until we can get our own. And when this occurred and we reunited and we realized that these boys who we'd been together with for well over a year would never be seen again. We had one situation before we left for Virginia to go overseas. We were on field training. And field training, we had these motorized units, radar equipped, and the land that they settled on were usually furnished by the farms where they were, the businesses that owned the land. They gave this to the service to be used as training grounds. And the last group we were in was a farm. There were about 10 of us in the unit, and amongst other things, one of the boys became romantically inclined with the farmer's daughter. And before we left for overseas, they married. And unfortunately, he was killed. And we were told in no uncertain terms, we were not allowed to speak about it. We were not allowed to write home about it. It would be censored. And the reason being, they didn't want the Germans, not that they didn't know the ship was sunk, they didn't want them to know how successful they were. They had an electrical bomb that for the first time was used and was so effective and killed so many boys. A number of the other deaths involved in the water came as a result of the German planes not being satisfied with releasing the bomb and hitting the ship, came back over and started strafing the water. And I don't know how many boys they got there, but certainly they got many of them. The one thing I really knew, I had to get away from the ship. And fortunately, on the high side, when you did take 1 or 2 strokes, you moved ahead 3 or 4 feet because the current was with you. The only danger when you left the boat is going through these burning pools of oil. You had to get beyond that point so nothing happened. And then it was just a question of keeping afloat, and unless you grabbed onto something, it was difficult to see how you can keep afloat for that long a period of time. Like I say, it was pitch black, you saw nothing, the water was very cold. When I grabbed onto this hatch cover, each of the boys would try to start picking themselves up, just boosting themselves because it was so cold in the water. And it was one instance where actually enough boys picked themselves up. It turned the hatch cover over. And I think when it came back, we lost 1 or 2 boys, I'm not sure.
That's incredible. Did you pray at all?
I'm sorry?
Did you pray at all in the water, sir?
Yes, I think I did. I think I did. I was frightened, and I said, please God, please help us.
Could you hear anything from the other men in the water? I know it was dark, but could you hear?
You heard screaming. You heard groups singing. Some of the weirdest things in the world in terms of sound were coming across. But the overall thing was fright. And there were all kinds of praying and just, please let me go, let me be safe. It was very scary, very scary. I think that there are boys that possibly froze. They were so cold they couldn't keep their head up. And what happened is that they went under, they drowned, they would bob up again, and eventually you'd see some of the boys, just ahead floating by. It's not too much different than those who couldn't do anything with the life belt. They also were just tilted a different way, and they came floating by. So there were any number of boys that were not alive that kept passing you in the water.
You mentioned you were in the water for about 7 or 8 hours. What were you doing to keep warm?
There was nothing you could do except pee in your pants. Actually, there was absolutely nothing to do except to get your body a little bit out of the water. If the entire body was in there was no room to get any kind of relief. But it didn't solve anything because you couldn't keep anything but your head above water anyway.
Did you witness the Rhona go down, sir?
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, from a distance you could see where the front end finally went way up, and very slowly it just began to go under.